And the president has the power to issue an adaptation order.
Yes.
Under the second proviso to clause D, the president can issue an adaptation order.
Correct.
When you have a regular government and a legislative assembly in place, you require the concurrence of the government.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Now, where the power of the government has been vested in the president under 356, it cannot be that the power of the president to issue an order of adaptation is taken away.
Correct.
Now, who will exercise that power? That power of concurrence?
The president is. It can't be contrary to clause D of 373D. It can't be there, Malaz.
No, but
that power can't be exercised.
370, no, Mr. Sibal. 370D says that no such order which relates to a matter other than referred to in the last preceding clause shall be issued except with the concurrence of that government. Now, that government means the state government.
It means Council of Ministers.
Council of Ministers. Now, what happens when a 356 notification is issued?
Please.
In which case, will we say that that power cannot be exercised at all by the president?
I'll answer that then. Malaz, kindly read Malaz C and D. Such of the other provisions of the Constitution. That is excluding Article 1 and 370.
Well, under D, the president has the power to issue adaptations to the Constitution, which are all these orders that we are now seeing.
The other provisions of the Constitution, it says, D says that, Malaz.
Right.
Which of the other, excluding 1 and excluding 370. This is an amendment of 370 itself. How can the president exercise that power under D?
No, we are now looking at the exercise of the power to substitute 367.
Yes, but that effectively is the amendment to the Constitution,
To
C70.
Mr. Sibal, the president has the power to amend the Constitution or create exceptions by taking recourse to the power under Clause D, the second proviso. The president has an unquestioned power to do it.
Yes.
When there is a government in existence, it is conditioned by the requirement of concurrence. Now, what happens when the government has been superseded under 356? I'm just using superseded in a loose expression. If the government has ceased to exist by the exercise of the power under 356, the entirety of the power of the government is now vested in the president.
But even the government cannot change Article 1, 370. Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly can't.
You're right, absolutely. Therefore,
the executive can't go beyond that.
You're right. Therefore, the government also has no power to amend 370 by itself.
No, can't change the scheme of 370. Forget about amendment.
But 370 itself postulates that it can be abrogated. And
370 says that it can postulate to efface Article 3, then I have no answer.
No.
Then I have no answer.
No. Mr. Sibal, the question is slightly different. Now, under Clause D to Section 371,
yes, the
president, by an order, can make modifications to the provisions of the Constitution as they apply to that state.
Well, please, I'm sorry to interrupt your lordship, but read the first part. Such of the other provisions of this Constitution.
Correct, I'm coming to that.
Modifications can only be...
We have understood that, just for the time being, just leave that argument apart. Because one way to interpret Clause C to Section 3, Article 371 is that it is only saying 1 and 370 will certainly apply to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. D refers to such other provisions of the Constitution shall apply in relation to the state subject to such exceptions and modifications as the President may by an order specify. For the time being, we are referring to 367 because the power under 367, there was 367(4) which was applicable even at the time of in 2019. There was Clause 4 of Article 367 which was certainly applicable at the time, even in 2019.
Yes.
Now, if in order to make modification to that clause, during when 356 is invoked, what will be the procedure?
But that's an interpretation clause. That's not a clause to amend the Constitution. I mean, I don't understand, Malaz. I mean, obviously, I've gone something wrong in my understanding of the plain reading of the section, Malaz. Obviously, I'm completely wrong. But with greatest respect, Malaz, that's an interpretation clause.
Interpretation clause cannot be amended.
No, by interpretation clause, you can't amend 370. That's the power. With great respect, Malaz. You can't substitute the legislative assembly, constitute a legislative assembly. What has that got to do with interpretation? What you can't do directly, you can't do indirectly, Malaz. And where does the president get that power when it says such of the other provisions of the Constitution shall apply in relation to the state subject to such extent. That means other provisions of the Constitution, you can have exceptions and modifications, not exception and modification 370. So I will not amend 370, but I will amend 367 to amend 370.
In your argument on that as well. 367.4.
Problem.
One second. 367.4 was brought in for the first time not with the Constitution, but in 1954, right? So when 367.4 is brought in, if your argument is right, then the original insertion of 367.4 is also invalid.
No, that was interpretation. Well, this is Damru. That's a case directly on point where your lordships have said governor was always known to be the governor. Sadr-e Riyasat was only the name. The argument was Sadr-e Riyasat prior to 1965 had to be elected.
Right. But
that's straight away. Had to be elected. But in fact, now the governor was directly appointed by the president, right? He didn't have to be elected. So merely because there's a change of nomenclature, but if you change the substance of 370, considerations would be entirely different.
That's a submission.
That's held by your lordships. So let's not, there was no fundamental alteration there. Here there's a fundamental alteration. What you can't do directly, your lordships are now saying that let's look at 367. It's hard to find an alleyway to reach a logical conclusion. One can try very hard. But I get lost when I go to my own.
Let's put it very simply.
Lost in alleyways.
Let's put it very simply. When Article 356 is in operation, how will you effectuate Clause 4 to Article 370, Clause 1, according to you?
I will, Malad. Please let me reach that stage. I've tried to answer all your questions so far, Malad. I'll answer that also.
So now we have seen the that notification of 5th of August and the original Article
370, please remember, it says notwithstanding anything in this Constitution at the beginning, and then it says notwithstanding anything in the foregoing provisions. 356 doesn't begin with that, with a non-obstante clause. It's important to know that even 373 says notwithstanding the above provisions. So it's notwithstanding of notwithstanding. So then how do you exercise that power in any other way? 366 has to be subject to 370. Doesn't say notwithstanding any provision of the Constitution, I can do what I like. Well, if you go back to Malad's, what we tried to get rid of in 1950.
Yes.
It says that provided further that no bill providing for increasing or diminishing the area of the state of Jammu and Kashmir or altering the name or boundary of that state shall be introduced in Parliament without the consent of the legislature of that state. So there is no legislature, there is no legislative assembly. Governor has dissolved on the 21st of November, the assembly. You have to introduce the bill only with the concurrence of the legislature. You introduce the bill contrary to the article because he says this is suspended, nothing exists. But by this time it's dissolved. How do you do that? Every executive act is constitutionally flawed, impermissible. It's a violation of the fundamentals of constitutional law.
Yes.
So the first proviso dealt with in other states like Telangana when they were created. It had to go to the legislature for expression of views. Government of India may not. Parliament may not agree with those views. Of course, the power of Parliament given by the Constitution itself. So they introduced a bill without the legislative consent. I'll come to the reorganization bill later, but I just wanted to mention, because we are on this list of dates, that this itself could not have been done.
Governor's consent was taken.
Had to be, Malas. Not that we know, but yeah, it was hard. That's right. That's right. No, I'm sorry, Malas. The proviso, and then they gave consent themselves, took their own views. Well, they had to take the views of the legislature, they removed the proviso and took their own views. And on the basis of that.
But give us the sequence. You told us last time, I think 19 December 2018, which was the documents compilation, volume 3, page 92, when the proclamation under 356 was issued,
that's right.
They suspended the provision of the state constitution and proviso to Article 3 was also suspended.
That's right.
That's step one. Right?
That's step one.
Then thereafter,
President's rule was extended from time to time.
Yes.
On 3rd July, it was extended thereafter. And on 5th August, this happened.
5th of August, 19.
So originally, Mullah's 19th of June, just to get 2-3 facts right, 19th of June, Mullah's BJP withdrew support. 20th of June, Governor exercised the powers to keep the assembly in animated suspension. 20th, the very next day, he didn't Mullah explore the possibility of a government being formed. Now he had to necessarily under the Jammu Kashmir constitution hold elections within 6 months. When there were some attempts made in December to form a government, November, to form a government between the National Conference as well as PDP, immediately on 19th December, 21st November, he dissolved the assembly. The 6 months were not yet over.
So what is the date of that?
On 21st of November.
21st of November 2018.
18. He dissolved the
And
assembly.
can you just ask one of your juniors to give us a page reference?
I do that. What power does the president have to make such a declaration? Which provision of the constitution? Now let's see this. So parliament, that is acting under 356, becomes the legislative assembly, recommends to itself, exercising the powers under 370, as a constituent assembly, and then says that 370 ceases to exist. So you mullahs therefore assume all the powers of the state legislature, of parliament, of the constituent assembly, and give consent to yourself. Recommend to yourself and accept the recommendation yourself. So amazing exercise of constitutional legerdemain.
So the power which they were exercising was the power under clause D of subsection 1 of clause 1 of article 370.
Correct. Absolutely right. But unfortunately, mullahs, they couldn't do that because clause 1 dealt with instrument of accession, subject related to instrument of accession, and then concurrent list issues.
No, clause D is wider than that.
Wider.
You're referring to clause A. We're referring to clause D.
Yes, I'm reading all clause A also.
D requires the concurrence of that government.
That's correct.
That is the J&K government.
That is government means government council of ministers, mullahs. Government is not under the.
But tell us what happens when there's a 356 in operation in the state of J&K?
Well, let's put it this way, Mullahs. How does 356 in normal circumstances happen? Mullahs, the governor sends a report. The report is that the provisions of the constitution cannot be carried on in this particular state. The government of India under 356 Mullahs takes over.
Right.
Right. Now, at that time, the assembly is in suspended animation. That's the normal way that it is done. You keep the assembly in suspended animation, you exercise your powers. Ultimately, the intent is to restore democracy. Therefore, mullahs, towards the end of it, when you know that elections should be held and you want restoration of democracy, you dissolve the assembly and then you hold elections.